Before we get to Nightmare Vacation itself, we like to have preambles on these shows. We like to give you a little something extra as an appetizer, as a teaser. Uh, Malcolm and Marie was kind of our preamble last week in our that film we did last week called Possessor, yeah, and we talked about Malcolm and Marie, but kind of observing the reaction to it and expressing some frustrations of discourse, and I put myself in a very awkward position of defending a film I hadn't seen yet. So, um, yeah, I was like, let me watch the film, and if I get egg on my face, I'll come on the next episode and like
Well,
come up
yeah,
front
it's
about it.
fine. It's fine to do that kind of thing as long as you like then go the whole hog, watch the film, and then kind of come correct kind of thing. And so, what happened then? What happened with Because I haven't seen Malcolm and Marie. How did you find it? Were your like positive feelings towards the films justified?
Okay, so two criticisms of the film. I mean, mainly I was looking at tons and tons of like letterbox reviews that were very arky, generally revolving around jokes about straight couples being horrible,
Mm-hmm.
and and the other joke was, oh, that this is just a mouthpiece for the director,
Mm-hmm.
Sam Levinson. I'm completely sympathetic towards. Yeah, it's cool to make like anti-straight jokes, like they can be funny. But I'm just saying this is the energy I was going into the film with,
Yeah.
of like looking out for like how through scrutiny, I was like, how is John David Washington being portrayed? Um, and another angle I was going in with is one of my my favorite film of all time is the Before trilogy, and the third act of the Before trilogy is Before Midnight, which is the exact same structure as this film. It's a couple. Spoiler alert, Matty. I'm sorry. It's a
That's
couple
fine.
in a room arguing for 90 minutes. Uh,
Yeah.
and these types of films are like The Raid, but instead of like fist and guns, it's like emotional
Yeah.
violence. It's just two people trying their best to like break each other down with their words, and each scene is like a one up of what came before, uh, which is a very interesting formula that clearly I've enjoyed before. And I went into Marriage Story wanting that kind of thing, and I was severely disappointed by Marriage Story. So I do
Mm-hmm.
hold films that hit this kind of sweet spot for me at a very high standard. Yeah, that's kind of what I was going into this film with.
Okay.
Immediately, kind of, I remember you talking about you thought the cinematography looked cool in the
Yeah.
trailer, and upon watching the film, I can say I think the film is visually. I'll speak on a technical level before I move on to like my thoughts on it regarding the controversy, the criticisms.
Mm-hmm.
On a technical level, I think this film is generally gorgeous, and the way I don't people. One thing I saw in a snarky letterbox review is kind of like making fun of the use of black and white. It's kind of like a gimmick, kind of like a quick and easy
Oh
way to make a film look
God,
artsy.
like when are we gonna get over that? Like just some films are in black and white. It's no longer interesting. Oh my fucking God.
I personally thought that the black and white in this film made it look really gorgeous. It gives it this makes it feel classical, and there are many shots of like Marie leaving the house to go walk through the garden to get away from Malcolm for a
Mm-hmm.
bit, and it's like you can see like the moonlight beaming through the trees, and the way like light plays around with shadows in like a black and white cinematography. Is a very specific type of beautiful that you can't really do. Oh, you can't really do with the normal color cinematography. You do a different kind of beautiful.
Yeah.
Um, but I did feel like aesthetically it was very well used. And I'm not a filmmaker, so I don't know like the mindset when you make a film black and white. I don't think it. I get the vibe that it's not always like the black and white symbolizes the stark nature of their relationship. I can tell sometimes it is just like a aesthetically this is what felt right and
Yeah.
and what I wanted to play around
I,
with in this kind of
to
setting.
to go into that very briefly, I think that's what makes comments like that so annoying. It's because those people that say that act like you need this grand cinematic reason for needing to be in black and white. But it's just like no, it's just sometimes it's the right choice in presentation for a film. So really it's like them who are the pretentious ones for like assigning all this meaning to like obviously the way you choose to film your film is quite significant, but it's not like not every director who makes something in black and white is implying that they're imbuing it with like some like grand symbolism. It's just like it can just be a effective way of presenting your film. Like in Malcolm and Marie's case, it looks like it makes the film very theatrical and sort of like kind of disconnects you a little bit from the reality of the film. And like if you're trying to watch, just like sort of almost analyze the relationship of these two people, I think that would be a really strong like choice in terms of filmmaking. So yeah, I find comments like that so pretentious in themselves because they're just wrong. It's quite an easy
It often
stylistic
it often
choice.
feels like it's often treated the same way you treat like films of white characters saying the N word. Like you were doing something so abhorrent that there has to be an amazing reason
Yeah,
for
yeah,
doing
yeah,
it. And
yeah,
that's what it
yeah.
feels like with black and white films. Like it's some sort of fundamental sin, and you
Yeah,
have to have a
no,
really good
exactly.
reason.
Exactly.
Um,
It's
but
the same as just being like, oh, it's just a form of color grading at the end of the day. Like it's like oh, it's so frustrating.
and then angry man shouts at clown for 10 minutes. And you know what you said about otherworldly? I think that's 100% what this film's going for. It felt like a stage play. Um, I felt like the actors were directed to act as though it's a stage play.
Yeah.
Of like, there are lots of like very long monologues that people speak for long amount of
Uh-huh.
time while the other person just listens and then they reply, which is very theatre.
Yeah.
And John David Washington's movement as well. Again, when I was getting into this, I was really observing how he was performing. And he is elastic in this film. He feels like a Disney villain the way he moves
Mm.
around in this. He is so exaggerated and over the top, and like humorous and charismatic, but on the switch of a dime, like generally horrifying. There are parts of
Great.
this film where he's like staring at Marie with so much contempt and hatred that like it is
Compelling.
physically uncomfortable.
Right.
Yeah, and compelling. And that's when it clicked for me. Like comparing this to Before Midnight, I was worried it would kind of be like treading the same ground a bit too much. I think this is a very different film to Before Midnight in the sense that I genuinely think at its core, Before Midnight is about love. And it's about two people who genuinely love each other and want things to work out, trying their best in like the hardest part of their relationship.
Mm.
And they hurt each other in that film and try to hurt each other. You get a sense that deep down they just want this to work.
It that
Whereas,
also,
oh yeah,
that film reminds me of a really great line in Scrubs where Dr. Cox talks about like what makes a good relationship, and he says like every couple goes through the same shit. The one it's just the ones that will make it every single time one of them will stand up for that relationship and fight for it. And that film just gives me that energy so much.
it's 100% that. It's I don't know if we'll talk about it one day.
Hmm.
I won't go in too much depth about it. But yeah, it is two people like brawling with each other emotionally to
Make it
try
work.
to salvage
Yeah.
something. So, like, I won't spoil the dynamic in that, but there's love at the core of that film, in my opinion. And I think Malcom Marie is about two people who hate each other, and they're driven. There's a clear passion in their relationship, but I think it's like a death drive. It's like a very destructive, dysfunctional, passionate relationship, if that makes sense. Well, like the id it's being driven by is one of like hate, like the libido rather it's being driven by is a hateful one.
Yeah.
But they are into each other. Like there is chemistry here, but they are just like they're awful
Just
together.
the
Like
absolute
he
worst
is,
kind. Yeah.
yeah. And another thing that's different from this and Before Midnight is I think Before Midnight works really hard to give both sides of the argument very valid points. Like both, like in Before Midnight, Jesse says some things that are really dismissive about like the gendered issues that Celine is having, and then Celine's actively seeks to hurt Jess as much as she possibly can in ways that like aren't helpful in relationship
Mm.
conversations. Um, and I mean, one thing they found making that film was that people came away from it like easily siding with both. And ironically, what one thing Linkletter was surprised by is women tended to side more with Jess, men tend to side more with Marie, which is very funny.
That's
Um,
crazy.
Whereas I do think Malcolm Marie is way more black and white. Like Malcolm actively feels like an antagonist in this film.
Uh-huh.
And the rants he goes on about cinema and himself, he's so clearly an egotistical maniac. Honestly got very strong like Paul Thomas Anderson vibes. Like he feels like how I imagine Paul Thomas Anderson would talk when he was like really coked up and Magnolia just came out, and he's like so obsessed with what the critics are thinking about it.
Mm.
And there's a great scene in this film where he gets a really good review from a critic, and he hates it, and he goes and rant about like white journalism and how white journalists try to praise black art and how condescending it comes across. And and this gets to the heart of like the criticism I saw of this film. Lots of people in Letterboxd, lots of white people complaining like, oh, it's a white director, a white male director getting on this big soapbox and talking about race in films and criticism and how films shouldn't be political, which is everything John David Washington's faced with. It's like because he's a black director, everything he makes has to be political. They won't just take it on the grounds he gives it on. And I feel like a lot of this criticism refuses to actually deal with what the film is saying and what it's doing.
Yeah.
This film does a very like metatextual, playful writing, in my opinion, where John David Washington would go in and rant about how because I'm a man, no one's gonna let me write stories about women and like think I'm just speaking from the perspective of a man. And the meta aspect of that is the director is a white dude writing a black couple.
Yeah.
So clearly, this is something the film is spotlighting. This is like a thing the film is about. And at the end of all of his rants, and again, the main critique is that this was like a mouthpiece for this director to be obnoxious. At the end of all of these rants is Zendaya smirking and giving like very well articulated responses about how, hey, maybe your perspective is limited because you're a man, and you're writing a biopic about Angela Davis, who would literally argue that everything you do artistically is inherently political because you are black and in America. Like,
Mm.
and you're claiming that you can make these grand rebellious statements that you're outside of this establishment that you hate so much. Your lead actress is a self-proclaimed socialist, but you're literally are the establishment. You are the system. You're very wealthy. We are in like a beautiful house. We got put in by the producers of
That's
this film.
amazing.
Yeah, every single rant that he has, you know, is counterbalanced by Zendaya, and it would be completely wrong to use Zendaya's character, in my opinion, as a victim in this film. Like, she is just as sharp, funny, and
Yeah.
aggressive.
Provoking.
In less of a toxic way, in more of a reasonable way, I'd argue. But aggressive in terms of defending herself, as John David Washington is in this film. And it's just, I found it very strange that people wouldn't actually deal with this film. In my opinion, were very dismissive
Yeah.
of it without taking it on its terms.
Well, I think one thing that strikes me is just like if you about kind of what you said about directly engaging with the text itself. One thing that really struck me was like yes, sometimes like a director doing something to do with like an issue that doesn't affect them, like race, or doesn't not affect them, but like doesn't affect them as much as other people, like race or gender. Like sometimes that is relevant, but also like I do film at university, and if I wrote an essay where I like didn't engage with the film and just wrote this film is by a director of this background, therefore this film is flawed. That I mean, like, no matter how many words I wrote of that, that would be a terrible essay. You have to like just because Sam Levinson wrote that doesn't mean you just get to like disengage with the film's point and just be like, no, my review is final. Like, I said what I said. You have to like go, this is why Sam Levinson being white makes him wrong. You have to actually make it about the text, has to inform the text, and not just supersede it, has to actually like. It's just so strange to me, like how incredibly hyper focused we are on the artist over the art itself nowadays.
And I mean, I apologize if I defend Sam Levinson in the next few years. I don't know, he gets cancelled or something horrible happens. Know that I'm speaking from a perspective in early 2021, where it's quite a young director.
Yeah.
I think in cases where you are gonna do like the identity of the director hurting the film, are films where the subject matter is like a savior type of one.
No,
So,
exactly.
for example, Django Unchained is very limited because Tarantino, one, is a white man and kind of writing this kind of like slave revenge fantasy. Two, like historically hasn't handled race very well.
Mm-hmm.
So, like that feels very disingenuous coming from him. Whereas I think in my opinion, the core tension at this film is one about gender. And the critique of this film, which is slightly in Before Midnight, but is even more kind of, I think, harsh in this one,
Mm-hmm.
is a display of a very specific type of misogyny and gaslighting. And Malcolm views Marie as a project, as like an artistic muse,
Mm.
and in that way, Marie like loses all of her internality in his eyes,
Yeah.
and he can treat her wherever he wants to, and he can exploit her for his art, and he can tell her, you're fucking insane, you're a strung up addict, tell her the story of what she is, as to like gaslight her to make her feel unsure about herself, right?
Mm.
And this film, in my opinion, at its core, is about like, the destructive artist muse relationship and how like gross and misogynistic
Mm-hmm.
it can be. I think like Sam Levinson as a man can, as a male artist, is in a good position to write about that situation. And I don't think the core of the film is about like how black art is received. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
some of like the play of the film, and like I'm sure Zendaya and John David Washington were bringing their own insights into that aspect of the
Mm-hmm.
film. At its core, the core thematic drama of this is one about the artistic mood kind of gendered relationship. So I just don't think people have done much work to think about this in a meaningful way. And I know that Letterboxd I know this is a social media app, and maybe I'm expecting too much, but I did find it quite frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my final thoughts on it.
Sweet. Yeah.
And that was the bonus episode. So catch us next week for our scheduled Rico Nasty Nightmare Vacation review. And yeah, we hope you enjoyed that. See ya.